My name's John Savicky. I am speaking on behalf of an organization called the Center of Procurement Excellence. They're a nonprofit that really is just focused mostly on RFPs and solicitations. So they asked me to come and present on RFP myths and challenges. Some of you saw me yesterday. A portion of this may be a repeat of yesterday, but then I'll go through new material as well. If you have any questions, stop me at any time. If you have a specific RFP or project coming up that you have questions about, even if it's topics we're not talking about, feel free to ask me. I'm happy to share everything I've learned over the last 20 years in procurement. I've worked with a number of different public and private entities throughout the US, Canada, Europe. We'll provide you a link at the end of the presentation. You'll have all these slides, so you don't have to worry about trying to write everything down. Okay, I think I have 5 or 6 major topics or themes that I wanted to cover today. And these are questions that I've heard a lot over the past year or so presenting. So the first one is, why aren't we getting more proposers or suppliers coming to our projects? And really, what you have to understand is if you've never worked for a supplier, you don't think about some of these things. So along with helping, consulting for owners such as yourself, I also consult with suppliers on how to respond to RFPs. So I've seen both sides of the fence. So for suppliers, when they're looking at all the different opportunities and your solicitation is just one that's out there, these are the major questions that they ask themselves before diving into your procurement. So it's, what's our current workload? Can we take on more work? What's your reputation as a client? How good is your scope of work? Can we make money if we win? How much effort is it to propose, and can we win? So yesterday, we kind of touched on items 5 and 6. So I'm not going to go through that in a lot of detail, but we'll talk about all of this today. So in terms of client reputation, we partnered with the state of Tennessee. They were having issues getting suppliers to propose on their projects. It was the same suppliers, 2 or 3 suppliers, and they were doing a really bad job. And they're saying, we're still publicly advertising all our solicitations, but it's the same bad contractors coming. So what we did is we just did a quick survey, 10 questions, sent it out to 56 contractors, or sent it out to 100 contractors, got 56 responses, and you can see just the highlights. 70% believe the process isn't fair, don't believe they have an equal chance, and gave the state a 30% compared to 80% with other owners. So if you put your vendor supplier hat on and this is what you think of that owner, what do you think the impacts are? Are you gonna are you gonna propose on their next project? If you do propose, how much time and effort are you gonna spend writing the best proposal? Yeah, the minimum. And so, we presented the results and the state wasn't happy. They're like, this isn't right. We are a fair owner. We treat everyone the same. It doesn't matter what you think of yourself. It doesn't matter if you think you're the best owner. The only thing that matters is what vendors think of you. So if vendors think you're not a good owner, you're not a good owner. You have to address something that gives them the perception you're not a good owner. So if you're struggling with getting a lot of suppliers, this is one easy way to determine where the problems might be. You should just do a quick survey. Items we talked about yesterday, and this deals with how much effort is it to propose and can we win? So for those that didn't attend yesterday, if we look at all this criteria, schedule, past experience, resumes, approach, staffing, safety, most of you won't argue necessarily that some of these are really bad to ask for. You'll say, yeah, that's okay, that's better than the other. The challenge is when you take a step back from the supplier side, if we start asking for all this information, Do you think this looks more attractive or less attractive to your suppliers? Less attractive, because it's what? More work. The example I talked about yesterday, this is a client that I won't say, could be a client in this room, issued a solicitation, 190 questions we had to respond back to. They provided us with 4.5 weeks to respond. So they gave us an extra half week, because they're like, 4 weeks is the normal, we'll give you a little bit more time. They ended up extending this, I believe, to 6 weeks because they got 200 questions that they had to go through the addendum. Yeah, so I forget how many pages it was, but there was probably like 50 pages of Q&A. And a supplier we worked with said their proposal was almost 200 pages long, so almost a page per question. Like, how many suppliers enjoy doing that? Out of the supplier community, what type of suppliers does this hurt? Why does it hurt the small businesses? Yeah, so the supplier we worked with had like 10 people. Guess what? All 10 people, along with doing their jobs, had to do what? Work weekends until midnight trying to respond to this proposal. Totally unfair. Now, the bigger companies have what? Business development teams. They have teams that all they do is respond and they can do the cut and paste, but your small businesses don't have that. I don't want to say. I don't want to say. I don't know if they, we'll find out in June. They're going to spend 6 months evaluating. No, the bids just were due a few weeks ago. So I don't know, but I'm guessing it's not going to be a lot. And they're going to be like, I don't understand why we didn't get more proposals. Yeah. So, and we'll talk about this later because it's come up before, is how do we help our small businesses, targeted businesses? This is one way. Stop asking for 200-page proposal responses. That hurts them. They just can't spend that resources. You got to make it easier for your small businesses. Any questions so far besides who this owner is? A supplier. Yeah. And of course, I can't write the response for them, but I could guide them saying, because a lot of times, like, you will ask for this and it doesn't even make sense. And so they'll say, like, what do they mean? And I'm like, I don't even know. Put that in a question. Yeah. Yeah. So I help them like write the questions to send to the owner. Yeah. Because sometimes when you've probably seen it, a vendor sends you a question, you're like, I don't really know what they're asking me. So I try to help them like be detailed in what you're asking so you get a detailed response back from them. Yeah, so they did it in stages. So originally they thought they could get it done in like 2 amendments. And then like the second amendment, they're like, oh, we got like 200 questions. We're going to need to extend it. So yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So if I'm not going to ask them what this action levels are and what the financial status,
yes. Correct. So if you hang on to that, I'm going to address that. Absolutely. So how do we do this? If kind of what I'm suggesting is not to do a lot of this, I'll explain that. Okay, so are there ways to streamline the RFP process? So I might be addressing it right here. Yeah, okay. So in a traditional RFP approach, so you're going to issue the RFP. So before this, you have all the planning, right? You prepare the RFP, you get the scope ready. That's all done, and then we have an award. So between the issuance to the award, typically you have 3 major stages. You have the proposal period, right, where you issue. You may have a site meeting, pre-proposal meeting, Q&A, and then the proposals are due. Once the proposals are due, you have the evaluation period where you evaluate everything. And then finally, you normally have your contract negotiation period. So generally, those are the 3 major blocks. Would everyone agree, or does anyone Disagree. Okay. So in terms of these blocks, where do we require suppliers to submit the most amount of information? Yeah, in step one. So step one, we typically require all this information, right, from each supplier. Right, so the safety plans, experience, resumes. So that all comes in, and in this example, 5 different suppliers. Do suppliers enjoy this? No. Now, once this is turned in, then what? You have to do what? Read and score it all, right? How many of your evaluators love reading and scoring these? All of them, yeah. They can't wait. No one's been like, oh, my truck broke down today, I can't make it. Yeah. Right? No one enjoys reading all these binders. And that can take anywhere from 1 to 4 months. In this example I just talked about, the client set aside 6 months just to read all these proposals. Now, how many of these suppliers are going to win? Just one. So all the time you spent reading this one, this one, this one, and this one, is that the best use of your time if you're not going to work with them? Now, some evaluators will say, no, it's a good use because I might learn things here that I can do what? Apply to there. But I'll get to this later. Most evaluators don't actually read all these proposals. It's just like not humanly possible. And then our last step is negotiations. What typically occurs here? It's normally you just finalize your contract terms and conditions, right? The lawyers talk to one another. So that's kind of the traditional RFP approach. I think most owners follows this process. So how do we streamline this? How do we address some of the things I'm talking about? What I'm going to propose is during contract negotiations, in parallel, what we're going to do is also do a scope validation or scope clarification. And this is going to be done with the one supplier that you invite here. So this one supplier is going to do all the work. So to your point, how do we make sure it's done? This is where we make sure it's done. So everything you would normally ask, you still are going to ask here. But you're asking it from how many vendors? Just one. So by doing that, what happens here? Now you can reduce the amount of information you ask suppliers up front. So now you have 2 owners. You have yourself that's asking for this, and your neighbor's asking for this much. And the supplier is looking at you and your neighbor. Which one are they more likely to propose on? If they have to pick one. Yeah. So the less intimidating we can make this look, you'll start to get more vendor responses. Now, the smaller these documents are, then what? It becomes easier for your evaluators to actually go through. So you'll start to see that now you might get more volunteers from individuals that want to be part of the evaluation committee. You can do evaluations in a week versus months. A lot of times, evaluators will tell me this is the first time they've actually read an entire proposal when it's short. Because they can read like 2 to 5 pages, but anything more than 5 pages, they start to do what? Start scanning. Okay? We're going to come back to some of these ideas. So if you still have questions, that's okay. I'm going to circle back to explain how this can work. But just at a high level. So once again, what we're trying to do is shift, instead of asking for everything up front, that makes it harder for suppliers, harder for small businesses, makes it harder for evaluators. What we're going to do is shift it all to the end. And only one vendor is going to do that. Does anyone have any major concerns right now? It's all right.
missing an essential element by the time you get to 3 if you're not asking for it.
Yes. No, absolutely. It's a fair question. So if I'm going to cut down a lot of these questions, we want to make sure we're inviting the right firm there. Yeah. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. So the 2 key items generally we've seen from our research to help you identify experts are the risk assessment plan, so the vendor's ability to identify risks and challenges, and their ability to add value. And I've got some examples that I'll go through here in a few more slides. So if I don't answer it, ask me that again. Any other major questions that we need to go through? Yes.
All in the proposal, but if there's a one selected, then you're going to.
For sure. So in your, absolutely. So in your RFP, you're going to write all these requirements. You're going to have a list of 20 items, and you're going to say, whoever makes it into this phase has to provide us with this information within the first 2 weeks. Right? So they're not surprised. Yeah.
So I can understand how that would work, but what happens, because we kind of do this cut down process too, and then all of a sudden we find out that their business report is terrible, and now we got to go back to the evaluation committee and tell them, you know what, we can't go with that.
Yeah. What do? You go to vendor 2.
And meanwhile.
And vendor 2, well, so here's the trick. This shouldn't take you more than 2 weeks. Now, they may not be able to do everything in 2 weeks, but within the first 2 weeks, you better go through the major deal breakers. And so if you have a major deal breaker within those first 2 weeks, they get kicked out and you go to vendor 2. If they don't have a major deal breaker, you may need another 1 to 2 weeks to finalize everything else. But you should know very quickly if this is the vendor you're actually going to sign a contract with or not. That's how I would stage that phase. Someone else had a question? Yes.
At the end of all this, will there be like an example of the solicitation method for us to see downloaded later or something?
I mean, I don't have a solicitation in here. I'm just going to walk you through the process. If you wanted to try and get a copy of the solicitation, I would reach out to CPE. And if they don't have one online, they'll probably forward you to me. So then I can provide you with some guidance. The problem I would have is we've shared, because we work with public owners, it's all public, it's all out there anyway. Some owners have taken that and just tried to copy and paste it, and it doesn't work because it's not as simple as just words on a piece of paper. You actually have to invest some time in training your vendor community for a couple projects before it clicks.
So then, conceptually, is this essentially like a condensed version of qualifying, if you will, like a qualifying stages, to then try and narrow your field to 1 or 2?
Yes. And so I'll try to show you that here. So just like in most of your evaluations, you may have 10 vendors respond, and you go through all this information. You may shortlist to the top 3 and do presentations, and then shortlist again to the 1 before you go into negotiations. We would do the same thing in this process. It's just with different documents. So you would shortlist, interview, shortlist down to 1, and then go into clarifications.
The time once you shortlist, you let the other folks know that, sorry, you're not making it on to the next one, and do they have a protest or a period in which they can?
No, so you would follow your protest procedure rules. So normally nothing is available until you get to either your notice of intent to award or whatever that you call it. That's when you would have to provide everything. So up until then, everything is confidential. Nothing would change. If it's different than how you do it now, you would still follow kind of that same rule. Did you have a hand up?
No, I was just thinking about that from, we do our work before we negotiate, trying to see if that would work.
So it can work. So it's just a different approach here. Yeah. You would just do that, a lot of this planning afterwards. The challenge with that is once the vendor has the award, they're maybe not as quick.
A lot of backtracking.
And not exactly, it's not as quick to respond, and if you realize you've made a mistake, it's a lot harder to like cancel the award and go back to the procurement. So it's not optimal, but I have worked with clients that have to do it that way. Yeah, it's more challenging.
Our challenge right now is the health agency with our IT procurement, figuring out where to fit our HCA specific IT security questionnaire.
Yeah.
Does that need to be on the front end or at what point in the back end? So we did one recently where we included all of the security documents as exhibits.
Yep.
RFP,
Yep.
where we're saying, hey, if you make it to a certain point, you need to see.
Exactly.
But we have a larger project coming up where our IT security team is, I think, wanting us to have it completed by the proposers a little bit earlier on.
Nope. I would push back. What you did was right. I would post it as an exhibit saying whoever makes it to the end, they're going to have to do this. We're going to want it within the first week of whatever that date is. And then tell your IT folks you're going to get it from this one vendor instead of 10 vendors.
So will we ask them at the point that we're issuing our notice to negotiate?
Yeah. No, so no, it would be notice of intent to negotiate is when you want them providing all the IT material. And not just the material. Normally what I would have is several meetings in here. So I would have the supplier meet with your IT folks and say, here's our form, let us walk you through it.
We also consider maybe not necessarily including the completion of the form as part of the evaluation process, but including some questions from our IT security team as part of the interview. That is part of the evaluation.
Yeah, so as procurement, you're gonna have to give and take. In the ultimate world where I had total control, I would tell them, no, you're not getting any of that. You're gonna get it with the one vendor at the end, and it's gonna be a pass-fail. But if they're pushing you hard, you're gonna have to give in, and so I would minimize the amount of volume the vendors have to do and just say, yes, I'll fill this out. So yes, no question, and then get the details later. Okay, so I've got different examples in all this, but this process that I just described can save you 40 to 80% less time. So you can run RFPs in 3 to 5 months easily in this approach. You can do it on $500 million projects and up. Right, so you can significantly cut down time, effort for your suppliers, effort for your evaluators, and you'll increase your competition. You'll get, typically, you'll easily double your level of competition. So once again, you got different clients here. The suppliers are looking, and they're saying, this client's requesting this, this, and that. You're gonna get a lot more competition here. Right, and that's what you want. The competition brings you the better ideas, it brings you the better costs. This is the city of Peoria, so I'll go through some different case studies here. They had a lot of bad performance, delays, change orders, quality. This is kind of the project where they finally brought us in. This is a brand new sidewalk, this is an ADA, you can kind of see, right? Doesn't look straight, it's already popping up. And it's hard to tell here, but this is the ADA ramp, and then it makes a 90-degree turn, and you can see the slope. So like someone, you know, in a wheelchair is just gonna fly off. And the contractor's like, no, there's gonna be like a railing. So I'm like, so they're gonna go right into the rail. But this contractor still didn't get it. This contractor's like, yeah, but I'm installing the railing like you said. And we're like, this doesn't make sense. And he's like, well, that's what you guys designed. So finally the city's like, we need a different approach. So part of what they did is we implemented anonymous proposals, and I'll talk more about this later. If you didn't attend yesterday, this sounds weird, so ignore this for now. We limited their pages, proposal sizes to 5 pages. Before this, it was unlimited. So vendors were turning in 30 to 60 page proposals, And then we also interviewed their key personnel. So I think we're just gonna focus on page limits for now. So obviously the results were great. They got a lot of awards. I'm gonna skip that. So the 5 pages, what we saw happening is everyone loved going from no pages to 5 pages. But what we started to see within the 5 pages is vendors were starting to turn in very common risks and very common solutions. So like a good one, safety is a risk. We're gonna put up a chain link fence around the project. Who's blown away by that? I mean, is that the greatest idea you've ever heard? Yeah. So we started to get a lot more of these common items. We're gonna meet with you. We'll work with you to resolve issues. We're gonna plan ahead to get permits. Really? And so what we did is we actually analyzed it. We saw 60% of this material was all marketing. It was all BS. So what the city did next is they went from 5 pages to 2 pages. And in 2 pages, they saw a lot of the marketing was wiped out. It forced vendors to do what? Get down to the question. So our general recommendation, and I've done this on billion-dollar projects, is 2 pages. On billion-dollar projects. Now your clients are not gonna like this idea, right? Your clients will say, no, they want the binders, but then they'll say, well, we never read them, but we still want it. Still want it. Yeah, so this, although it sounds simple, it's not easy to implement, right? So whoever asks, can I get a copy of your RFP? You can, but just saying, hey, we're gonna drop this to 2 pages, it's not gonna be easy for you to actually do that internally. It's gonna take some education and training with your clients and your internal folks along with your external suppliers. But our general recommendation is 2 to 5 pages, and this isn't their entire proposal. This is just for the part that's gonna be evaluated and scored. So they can still turn in their page of, here's my name, here's my warranties, here are all the city documents. They can still turn in all that. That doesn't get scored. It's simply pass-fail. But what's going to be evaluated by your evaluation team is limited to 2 to 5 pages. Any questions? Yes?
I think someone already asked for a sample RFP.
Yes.
And you said that.
If CPE doesn't have it, I'll see if we can find you one. But sure.
Right.
Hey, so you don't have to like start from like going to like a top fuel dragster. Like you can go to like a Corvette from your Honda Civic, right? So you can go to 5 pages and see how it goes and see if it's working for you before going to what? 2 pages. Yeah, 2 pages might be too extreme. But start slow. If you don't have any pages, start with 5 to 10 pages and see how it works. And then next year, go a little bit lower. I typically don't include resumes because, I mean, I've done enough interviews to see that like people can look great on a piece of paper. And then when you talk to them in the first 5 minutes, you're like, they totally lied. So I spend more time on interviews because you can pick up how much experience they have quicker in a 15-minute interview than a 2 or 5 page resume. Okay, so let's keep moving on. Are there other techniques for small businesses? As I said, cutting down the criteria is one way you can improve small business participation. The other thing you can do, well, I guess the first question, are small and targeted businesses capable of outperforming large businesses? Right? Are they capable? Yeah. If you've seen it, you know it. If you haven't, they are. The problem is they're not giving a fair chance in the current procurement process. So, circling back, the way you can give them a fair chance is to have the proposal anonymous. So when they turn in their proposal, a certain portion that's not scored can have their names. So their costs can have their names, the company names, where they're located. But the 2 to 5 pages that's going to be read and scored by your evaluators does not contain any names. So in your RFP, you tell them no company names, no product names, no people names, no names that can be used to identify who you are. So when the evaluators, as procurement, when you get this document, you're going to separate these two areas. You're going to assign a code and say firm A, firm B, and this is what your evaluators will see. They'll see firm A, firm B, firm C, and then you're going to say score them. And they're going to go like, I need to know the company name. Why do you need it? Well, I just need it. Okay.
I would love to block out the names, but then how do you prevent conflict of interest and people being conflict of interest?
Yes, so your conflict of interest will still apply. So once procurement gets the forms and you see like Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, you're going to know who the firms are. So when you send your conflict of interest documents, it's still going to say Microsoft, SAP, Oracle. They just aren't going to see which one matches the actual documents. Yes, sir.
In that instance, would you say also include any names of people who were part of that proposal? Just as
people.
Long as you're not matching it to that specific proposal itself.
No names. Yeah.
In the for conflict of interest. So,
oh yeah, for conflict of interest, you would do what you normally do. I just wouldn't tie it into Microsoft is firm B.
Just anonymize the actual proposal.
Yes. Yes. Right, so this forces your evaluators to do what? Actually score it based on the content and not the company name, which, you know, most people in my experience aren't really unethical. There are a few that, you know, want to pick their favorites, but most people aren't. But it's just, sometimes it's just natural to us when we don't understand or don't see companies we know, but we know this firm. Sometimes it just happens. We give that firm a higher score. And it's not because we're trying to be unethical. Something with our brain does that. So by taking away the names, it really gives everyone a fair chance. And I've got a couple case studies here. This is an IT project. This is up in Canada. I think it was between 1 to 200,000. So it wasn't a huge project, but for the university, it was big. They were expecting 3 firms to propose. They had the top 2 firms in the industry. And then, as you can see, we got 8 different firms just by doing it anonymously. You can see firm names, no company names. So what happened, and you can see here, so we did do a short list, and then we interviewed the top 3 firms. So the firms 4 through 8 did not make it to the interview cut. The top 2 suppliers in the industry were firms 4 and 5. So after talking to this client told me, 1, they were surprised they got 8 firms. But 2, they said, traditionally, I probably would have given firm 4 and 5 a higher score on their proposal because they are the industry best in this field. I probably wouldn't have given firm 1 a high score because I've never heard of them. Firm 1 was a small local business in this community. So what kind of he learned, the client, is through this process is the firm 1, and you could see the interview, they did amazing in the interview. Firm 1, even though it was like $200,000, to firm 1, that was their biggest, most important project of the year. To firm 4 and 5, that were like billion-dollar companies, are they going to send their best people to a $200,000 job? No. Right? They sent their new hires or the C team. So what this does is it kind of right sizes the project to the suppliers. And afterwards, I mean, he said this supplier did a great job. And he was humble and said, you know, under the traditional process, I don't believe I would have ever picked firm 1. Fort Polk, Louisiana. Anyone in the Army? Been to Fort Polk? I mean, middle of nowhere, Louisiana. This was a roofing project. This was to do a re-roofing on their medical hospital command center. So the client at the site, at the Army Command in Fort Polk said, hey, we're so remote, there's really only 1 or 2 roofers in this industry that have ever worked here that ever do a good job. So it doesn't really make sense to do an open procurement. We just want to hire our favorite roofer. So the colonel at the time said, no, we're going to use this process and see what happens. If your roofer wins, then guess what? They win. So we went out and we actually got, 6 different roofers proposed. So they were totally shocked that we would get this many proposals and shortlist. So you can see this is the firms before we shortlisted down to the interviews. So you can see only the 1 firm that was outside the mark. Turns out this was their favorite roofer. And before this, I said, hey, why don't we just shortlist them all? And the client's like, no, why do we want to bring in this firm? They're horrible. So once we revealed the names and they learned this was their favorite, they actually asked if they could rescore the proposal. They were serious. They wanted to rescore it. Because they're like, well, yeah, I know they said that, but they really didn't mean it. They know how we work. And the colonel's like, no, you can't rescore it. So they were upset because they really wanted their roofer back. But we ended up going with the highest performing roofer. They did a great job. And then my last case study here, this is the University of Minnesota. We had 100 projects, all anonymous. Our awards to small and targeted businesses went up 320%, just by doing anonymity. No other points, no other preferences. Just by making it anonymous, we saw a 300% climb in our small businesses, and the performance was outstanding. Right? So the idea that small and targeted businesses need help, they can't perform, is totally untrue. They just need to be given a fair chance. And the anonymity is the easiest way to do it. Once again, it sounds easy, but getting your internal clients to do it is not easy. Any questions?
So you're putting the onus on the vendor to make those 2 to 5 pages.
Yes.
And then what if they put their name on it? You disqualify them?
So it depends. So like recently I worked with the state of Idaho. They put in language that said, yes, if you make a mistake, you're thrown out. It's pass fail. Other clients I've worked with have language that says, hey, if you make a small mistake, we reserve the right to black it out.
And do you think that produces, you're telling them like, hey, it's totally anonymous.
Yeah, so that's why the state of Idaho said, yes, you better follow the rules or you're tossed. Other owners are like, no, we can black it out. As long as we black it out, it's still anonymous, it's still fair. So it depends what you're more comfortable with. I've done it both ways. Generally, if it's the first time, I'll do like 2 educational training sessions with your suppliers, and I'll speak on this. Like, make sure you got no names. I know everyone in here is marketing and business. So when you guys, go back to the other people, make sure you tell them no names, right? So there's a lot of training. Typically, you don't get a lot of vendors that make that mistake, but you may get 1 or 2, out of like 10 projects. So it is something that can come up, and your approach can vary based on what your organization is comfortable with. Okay. So I don't have my phone on me. How are we doing on time? Okay, how much time do we have left? Oh, okay. We'll try to go faster. Key personnel. I talked about this yesterday. Key personnel is extremely important, right? Remember this picture, right? This sums up everything, right? This is the one slide. If you have to present to your owners or to your bosses, to clients, this is it. Does it matter how great their scope of work was? Does it matter the name of this tattoo shop? Does it matter that you have a contract that says they have to do a good job? Like, none of it matters. The only thing that matters is what? Yeah, the skill of the people doing the work. Like, how good is your partnering plan, your training plan, your staffing plan? It's only as good as what? The person that's going to execute it. If they're bad, none of those plans matter. you're still going to have a failure, right? People make a difference. So in my experience, if you've got a risky, complicated political project, you should run interviews on the key personnel that the vendor's going to assign to your project. That's the best way to actually predict project performance. Some examples here. Kodiak. Has anyone been to Kodiak Island? Does anyone know where it's at? It's like, how far is it to Alaska from here? Like 6 hours, and then it's another 2-hour flight to this island, and then it's a 3-hour drive around the island to get to this site. This is where they launch rockets, or they didn't say rocket, or rockets and other objects, which means, yeah, missiles. This is the Minotaur missile, so it's hard to tell, but this is, I mean, the missile is, I think, 80 or 90 feet, right? So this tower is like 200 feet. They had a mishap. And so this mishap didn't blow up here. It was like 5 miles away. So this is like the shock waves that blew this thing apart, right? And this, once again, 200-foot tower. So, you know, they have these rockets scheduled like for the next year. So they have to get this repaired so that the next rockets can come in. So the first scope of work was we wanted to remove and clean up the site, remove the damaged panels so that we could start fixing it. So we wanted to hire a demo contractor to do this. So we had an architect engineer, they put together a spec. What they said is they wanted this wrapped in plastic first with scaffolding, because it's right, if you can remember, it's right on the ocean. And so they have bad winds that come in. So they wanted this wrapped so that the workers don't have any accidents. So part of the process is when you talk to experts, you ask experts, would you do anything differently? And one of the individuals said, yes, we would, rather than wrapping this entire tower with scaffolding and the plastic wrapping, we would suggest letting our people hang off ropes and remove the panels. And we're like, is this guy crazy? And we're like, well, you know, like we get like 40 to 50 mile an hour winds here. We're right on the ocean. And the guy like laughed and he's like, this will be the easiest job we've done in our history. Every job we work on are on oil rigs in the Atlantic Pacific Oceans. We're working in 100-mile-an-hour winds every day. We've never had an accident. We can't have an accident because someone dies. And so we have this proprietary pulley system that we use where everyone's harnessed, and once again, this will be our easiest job. We just don't have a job right now on an oil rig, and that's why we're bidding on this project. This system is not only faster, it's $1 million cheaper, and it's safer. Why didn't the architect engineer think about this? I mean, they only have so much knowledge, right? So in this process, we're giving that opportunity to experts, if they have it out there and they're proposing on your projects, to stand out from their competition. So we actually went with that vendor. They did a great job. They actually finished faster, and obviously we had no safety incidents. I showed this example yesterday. This is the US Coast Guard. This was also a roofing project. We had an architect engineer design a new roofing system. We were doing a site walk. We had 7 or 8 vendors walking the site. One of the vendors told me, guess what? This new roof isn't going to stop your water leaks. You've got cracks in your walls, broken glass, bad caulking, some of the windows are open. That's where all the water is coming into your building. So if you want no water in your building, we should replace all these items. Right? Only one roofer came up with that. Architect engineer didn't come up with that. After the architect and engineer heard this idea, they're like, oh yeah. I don't know how we missed it. Right? But in a traditional process, if you went, low bid, guess what? At some point, you're going to have an issue, and the contractor is going to say what? It's not me. I installed a new roof. This is out in Nebraska. This is a federal courthouse. What happened here is, once again, hired an architect engineer. What we wanted to do is design a canopy to go around this building brand new courthouse, $3 million budget. The reason is they had these LEED certified sun louvers. The problem was in Nebraska, you got snow turns to ice and you have icicles dropping and it almost killed people. So they want, of course, the government, they can't have a regular canopy. It has to be glass. It goes all the way around the building, $3 million, because it has to be pretty. So during, once again, the proposal process, one of the contractors came in and said, hey, we could just remove these louvers. And you just have snow falling, no more icicles. And this will only cost us like a few $1,000s. I can save you almost your entire budget. That's what the government did. They said, no, we want the glass. Right? But you gave what? The expert an opportunity to stand out from everyone else that's saying what? I'll do whatever you tell me to do. Right? And that's what your procurement process isn't giving credit to vendors that can think in your best interest. You're giving credit to vendors that can do what? Give you all the marketing stuff, take your clients out to dinner and lunch behind your backs, right? United Airlines, this is up in San Francisco. So SFO, if you've ever been there, we did almost every project there at the site. A lot of bad work that was being done. This is painting that's less than 2 years old, right? We're not painting experts, but we know that shouldn't be happening. So you can see here, well, maybe you can't. What do you think the problem is in this painting picture of this brand new painted wall? Wasn't prepped. So they contacted us. They're like, hey, can you help us come out, take a look at our prepping spec and help us modify our prepping spec so we get better quality paint. This is flooring. You can't tell, but once again, no prep. You can see coins and like dirt. They just painted right over it. So they're asking us, how do we get it better? And so our response was, you don't need a better spec. You need what? You need to hire people that don't need a spec, that don't need to be told how to prep. That's what you need. So we took a different approach, and you may not do construction, but in this approach, we just did the design build. So we had no architect engineer, no spec. We just said, here's the color paint we want, and here's when you have to do it. Give me the best painting project you can within our budget. That's all we issued. So it was like a half-page requirement versus a full design spec. We actually went with a different, higher quality vendor, and you can see all the prep work they're doing, epoxy injecting all the cracks. Were they higher price? Yes, they were higher price than most of the traditional low bidders. They went through, scraped everything by hand, and then they painted everything with a roller instead of a spray gun. So they're like, it's gonna take us longer, but the roller will get more paint on your hangers and it'll last longer. So instead of repainting every 1 to 2 years, this should last you at least 5 years.
Just under the maximum of your budget.
They came in under budget, yeah. But they were higher than the real cheap ones that were just gonna spray it and do the typical job. Now we came back 10 years after and the paint still looks great. They still haven't repainted it after 10 years when they were doing it every 1 to 2 years. Then they had these roofing projects, Quonset huts, built in, I forget what it was, like 30s or 40s. And they had issues with the roofing. And these were live hangars, right? So planes were using them. So once again, no spec. We just said, hey, we want the best roofing system. So the roofer we awarded to said, we're gonna install these tracks. We're gonna put these on the roof first, and we're gonna build a booth. And this thing's gonna move up and down. And that's how we're gonna install your roofing materials so nothing flies off into the engines. Developed it all themselves. No architect, no engineer. It was the best roofer came out with this idea. Last example here, this was their huge facility where they maintain all the engines. The problem was one of the vendors said, hey, we're gonna be tearing off this roof, but if you hire someone cheap, the problem is you're gonna have the nails, you can't really see them, but nails, and when we remove it, if some of these nails break off, and they land in some of these engines that no one sees, you won't know about it until it's too late. And that is a huge risk. So what we recommend is putting tarps internally in the areas we're going to be tearing off first. Right? Only roofer that suggested that. Every other roofer is like, yeah, we'll tear off the roof and put a new roof. Right? So that's what you want, is a procurement process that rewards expertise and rewards people that are thinking in your best interest. So how do we run this key personnel interview? So in a typical process, you have a team that comes in, typically, right? The team will have a few good people that speak well, dress well, act well, say everything you want to hear, right? They have the expertise. But then you have this person that's going to be assigned to run your project. And they say nothing during this interview. They may know nothing about the project. And that's who you're stuck with after award, unless you're about to go into what? Like contract litigation, and then this person comes back. So what we suggest is not having a team presentation, but actually having a one-on-one interview, like a job interview with each person. So no more presentations, it's an interview. You don't interview the sales, you don't interview executives. You only interview the project manager and 1 to 2 other key personnel. That's the only people you should talk to. 30 minutes done individually, not as a group. This morning I was with a client on Zoom, and they were doing group interviews. The problem with group interviews is when this person doesn't really answer well, what happens? The other people are like, oh, you know, what he really meant to say was da-da-da-da. And then the client's like, yeah, that is the right answer, right? So they're able to save these people. That's not what you want to do. You want to see the individual expertise. I would limit this to up to the 5. I wouldn't do more than 5 positions, but every person should be scored individually, so that what you want to communicate to your suppliers is that every person's going to make a difference. So you want the A team in what? Every position. Okay, I'll pause real quick. Any questions on interviews? Yes?
Do you have an interview, like maybe it's not a template interview script, but an interview script that you provide them prior?
The suppliers?
Or is it
So we've done it both ways. I have done it where we give them the questions ahead of time. The problem is someone trains them ahead of time, and during the interview, they're like, they're trying to remember what the boss told them to say. So I wouldn't give out the questions, but I would still give them like a 1-pager in terms of this is how it's going to work. No one else is going to be there. Be calm. We're not scoring you on how well you dress or how well you speak English. It's based on, do you know the project? Have you thought about the project? Can you lay out the project? So yeah, I do have a 1-pager to prep the individuals. Okay, reducing bias. I'm going to skip these. Basically, I think we've talked a lot about bias. This is a good example. This was in Minnesota. We were renovating one of the dormitories at University of Minnesota. So we're doing all the electrical lighting, renovating it in all the dorms. And so one of the electricians said, you know, a big risk is going to be male electrician working in the female dorms in their bathrooms. Right? It's going to cause complaints. So what we suggest is we're going to have female electricians work in the female dorms and male electricians work in the male dorms. And I remember, this is like 20 years old. I remember reading that and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And so like 3 of the evaluators gave them a 10 and the last evaluator gave them a 1. And so I talked to this evaluator and I said, why did you give this person a 1? I thought, sounds like a good idea. And he's like, well, you know, I've been an electrician here for 20 years. Before that, I was an electrician. My dad was an electrician all his life. And this vendor's lying because there's no such thing as female electricians. And I kind of did the same thing. I laughed. I'm like, and he wasn't laughing. And I'm like, you don't think there's female electricians? He's like, there isn't. I'm like, huh. What if this vendor has like female electricians? He's like, impossible. If he does, his cost is going to be out of our budget. We can't afford them. In his mind, as the expert electrician, he totally believed this vendor was lying. Now, this vendor won, brought in female electricians, did a great job. Now, this person at least was humble enough afterwards to say, you know, I'm sorry, I didn't believe this existed. He's like, I've never seen this in my life. And I mean, yeah, it's funny as it is, he literally did not believe there were female electricians, and he thought this vendor was lying. And so that's why it can be challenging to have, and not all your SMEs are this bad, right? Like, normally they're not this extreme, but your SMEs, subject matter experts, have some bias, right? And that bias can influence how they score, which can impact who wins the award, right? So keeping things anonymous can help you. It's not going to be perfect, but it can help you through the procurement process. Okay, real quickly, last item is skilled craftspeople, and this is going to be in procurement. So a few months ago, I was at NIGP at a conference. Before my session, the person before me had a session, so I sat through it, and he probably had about 60 people in the room, and we only had 50 minutes. He went and had everyone introduce themselves. Said, what's your name? How long have you been with the organization? What do you like to do? It was like 5 minutes per person. So it's like 40 minutes out of the 50-minute presentation is just doing intros. So I'm like, this is amazing. Either he didn't have his slides presented or prepared, or he no clue what he's doing. But after like the third or fourth person, I'm like, wow, this is actually kind of amazing. So, and these were all procurement people. Only 4 people had more than 10 years procurement experience. 7 had 3 to 10, 47 less than 3 years of procurement experience. And actually most of this was less than 1 year. It's totally different than it was like 5 years ago, where most procurement people had been there for 20 years. Like now the industry is changing. And this group of individuals, it's scary, right? Gen Z, like they don't care who you are. It's like, oh, I'll go there, right? And so remote work, does anyone do remote work still? Yeah. So like the state of Idaho, they forced to go back to in-person. So like half their procurement staff quit. They're like, we're not doing that. If you don't allow me to work from home, I'm quitting. And they quit. Right? So this is going to be a challenge. It's not going to go away anytime soon. My partner, Ken, he's presenting on this in more detail, I think at the closing keynote. But in essence, it's going to be an issue. It's never going to get better than today. So if you think today is bad, wait till next year. It's only going to get worse. So how do we address this? You know, you're all decentralized. Does anyone have procurement rules that say it's okay to be unethical and pick your favorites? Right? No, we all kind of probably have the same procurement policies. You have to be fair, open, transparent, maximize competition. We all issue solicitations, but we all do it in such a different way that if you're the city and you hire someone from the county, now you got to spend all this time training them. There isn't an easy solution, but what we propose is that long-term, some of you start to get together and start to standardize things amongst your different organizations. This way, if this person leaves and comes here, you don't need to spend weeks training them, right? It's the same kind of core policies. It's the same solicitation template. Like, why do you all have different solicitation templates, right? I mean, they all say the same things. It's just you have it in section 1 and you have it in section 6, and like it's all over. It'll make it easier for suppliers. It'll actually make it easier for you. And that's part of CPE's mission. So not just to promote them, but they do a lot of this and they try to help organizations. You might not be able to do it on an entire state of California basis, but if you can look at your neighbors next to you and your community starts to do the same thing, I think it'll help all of you out long term.